Welcome to Pioneer Mindset, a place where we challenge our mindset and address the discomfort in both business and life by finding clarity resulting in bold conviction. I'm your host, Garrett Ruskamp, fifth-generation farmer, husband, and father from rural Nebraska. Whether you're navigating frustration from past decisions or worry about the uncertainty you face today in your business, we're going to learn from our struggles and take on new challenges with a resilient mindset. Join me as I share my journey of struggles I faced in agriculture as a farmer and family man. I'm ready to dive into honest conversations to tackle the mindsets surrounding key issues that rural ag business owners face that will ultimately help you gain control, leading to a profitable and sustainable business. Let's adapt to Pioneer Mindset and get to it. Welcome back, everyone, to this week's episode of Pioneer Mindset. Coming from the son of the father who tried to get his son back to the operation, it's a tough thing to wrap your head around that if it wasn't for me, the farm would not have had to endure such hardships. But also, if it wasn't for me, the farm would not have survived. So these heavy words that I speak to you at the beginning of this episode, I actually posted this as a reel on Instagram and Facebook, and it did really well. So far at the time of this recording, only just a couple days after I posted it, I think we're sitting at about 80,000+ views, over 500, almost 600 likes, and a few different comments. And so I posted this reel. I kind of came up with this reel after I was sitting down Saturday afternoon, was working on some finances, was working on gathering up, updating our balance sheets. We're actually, kind of full disclosure, in a little bit of a land deal right now and trying to work through some of that. Every time I sit back down in the office and I'm working on the balance sheets, as we're updating things, a guy constantly gets reminded of things that happened in the past. I'm reminded as I update where our current debt load is at, as I update what our assets are and what we currently have, and all that fun stuff. And so literally this thought just came to me that, man, if it wasn't for me, the farm probably could have been in a better place than what it is right now. I speak the truth of that because that's just the reality of it to some extent, right? And I bring that up because if I hadn't come back, if we hadn't taken on all the debt, and which we'll get to here in a second, but if I hadn't done all that, we'd probably be in a lot better spot than where we are right now. But also, if I hadn't come back, would the farm have survived, continued on to the next generation? And furthermore, and we'll get to this in a second too, as we dive into this all, if I hadn't come back, and okay, say I did come back, but then if I hadn't been the one to step up and take ownership for the results of me coming back and everything we had to endure, the hardships, if I hadn't taken ownership of that, if I hadn't been willing to step into my role, we probably would have still sunk, right? And so I just bring all this heaviness to me because this is what's been kind of on my heart and mind lately. And I feel like there's a lot of other people that could maybe relate to this. So in today's episode, as we dive into this, what we're going to hear today, what we're going to talk about is we're going to be able to, those that are maybe in a similar circumstance, they're going to be able to relate to similar boots that I'm in. As I share my story, as I share everything we've been through, somebody that's in similar boots is probably going to be able to relate to this. We're going to hear about the story of past decisions that we made on our operation, but then also lessons of what not to do when passing down a legacy. And that's why, depending on where you're at, whatever season that you're in, maybe you're junior that came back to the farm with the uncertainty unknown. Maybe you're the guy that's just trying to figure out how to pass this thing on, right? Maybe you're in the midst of somewhere in the middle. But either way, I think there's going to be something that you can pull away from this episode as we kind of dive into our story, our past, how I wish we maybe would have done things differently, and just kind of walking through this step by step and going back to that phrase before, and even back to the reel. So if you have not seen the reel on Facebook or Instagram, go check it out. I think I've posted it on TikTok as well. The big thing there was I actually paired the reel with the music from MacArthur. MacArthur is a song by Tim McGraw, Eric Church, Hardy, and Morgan Wallen. 4 very famous singers. And the song itself, if you listen to that song, especially when you listen to it kind of paired with the reel there, but if that does not give you some sort of goosebumps, some sort of heaviness doesn't come upon that, we're probably not in the same boat right now. And I'll just kind of put that out there. Maybe you don't necessarily bleed farming like a lot of us do, for good, bad, or otherwise. That's why I'm very passionate when I come to this episode, sharing about our story, sharing about things that we've been through. I do have a general outline that I'm going to try to follow, so hopefully we can stick to it. But I'm just kind of talking about all this, breeding all this emotion into this episode based off of everything that we've been through. All right. So I wanted to kind of start with where we were at, where the Ruskamp operation was at pre next generation, pre bringing me back, before I entered in the picture as far as like fully back into the operation full time. All right. So I'm going to go back to an era of like late 2000s, early 2010. Just for context, I graduated in 2013, but that's also the year that my grandpa passed away. So I kind of go back to that time frame because it's kind of pretty pivotal back then as to pre me coming back to the operation. So as our operation sat back then, we farmed about a little under 1,000 acres, and we had cows. We had roughly about 150 head of cows at the time. So we ran some couple hundred acres of pasture. And who was involved at the time? Well, when my grandpa was still around, he was retired, but he was still involved in the operation as much as he could be. My grandpa's famous phrase was always, he'd rather wear out than rust out. He passed away in February of 2013, but I remember in the fall of 2012, so I was a senior and helped out on the farm as much as I could. Man, I remember him helping pick up post, picking up cornstalk fence and post and all that stuff. And he did as much as he could. So he was involved as much as he could be. And then my dad was involved, obviously. And then I had an uncle at the time. And so at the time, our operation consisted of farming. Majority of the ground that we farmed was owned. Some was still rented, but majority was owned. We didn't have a lot of debt, maybe just a little bit of equipment debt. And that was pretty much it. So our operation was pretty conservative, and it supported basically 3 households, 3 incomes, if you will, off of a pretty small operation because we were pretty conservative, because we didn't have a lot of debt load. And a lot of that wealth was probably built up. A lot of that operation was built up because of my grandma and grandpa and, investing in what they did at the time and just being of the generation that worked hard and made a good living. We kept that mindset for quite a while, just like I said, pretty conservative, maybe not necessarily willing to take huge risks, which ultimately preserved a lot of the wealth that they had. And so that was kind of where they stood at the time. I bring that to context because if you were to go to the banker's office and look at our balance sheet, look at our cash flow, and look at all that prior to basically the expansions, which we'll get to here in a second, things look pretty good. I mean, it wasn't huge by no means. The operating entity, Ruskamp Farms, was sitting in a good position. It was just steady Eddie, doing a really good job, being able to kind of go with the ebbs and flows of the market and the challenges at the time. But because we didn't have a high debt load, wasn't necessarily too big of a crunch whenever we got into hard times. And we were diversified, and then prior to, if you want to take a step back even further, back into like mid to late 2000s, we were in hogs. Yet, even at this time, I guess, and like I said, around that 2013 timeframe, we still had some buildings that we rented out, so a little bit of income there. Overall, fairly diversified. And so that definitely helps with the ebbs and flows. But I bring all that up because it's almost important to kind of look at, okay, what were the finances looking like prior to bringing the next generation back? And how were those decisions ultimately made? Then the comeback, as I'll call it, like that's when, starting to picture what's it going to look like to get me back to the operation, how we went about that process, and what did that actually look like? So before I even came back, it wasn't necessarily, I think it was probably always in the back of our mind, okay, so we started looking at building a hoop building. Getting me back into the picture, I guess getting me back into wanting to be more involved, that caused my dad to want to, all of a sudden do more things as well. In our area, like every other area, we pretend it's just ours. Well, it's every other area. Land is very competitive, right? So to pick up farm ground just didn't seem like that was going to be as feasible or as realistic or it to kind of fit our timeline. Whereas we could just go and turn around and basically build this hoop building, right? And expand our operation pretty quickly. And in the cow-calf side of things, pasture, kind of the same thing, hard to find there. So to expand our cow-calf operation with using pasture also seemed pretty hard to do. So now we have this opportunity out here where we can build this hoop building. I mentioned a hoop building. This was an AccuSteel hoop building that was designed. It was a bed pack building designed to basically keep cattle indoors. And so that way we could feed them in a confined area, feed them a ration, and basically expand our herd, dry lot them, if you will, not run them out to grass, but then hopefully maintain some of the elements and still have decent herd health. That was the idea. That was the theory. And so within that, like I said, going about making that decision, part of before we even got to that, what led to even thinking about this idea was we were calving. I can't remember what year it was exactly. We were calving, like I said, about that 150, 160 head of cows at the time. calving in about February, March timeframe. And we had some mud issues, we had some health issues, we had some really hardships. And at the time, it was mostly my dad that was doing a lot of the work. My one uncle at the time he lived off farm. He lived about half an hour away. So he still came up to the farm every day. But, there was times, whether it be Sundays or whether it be just all these random little things that feels like dad kind of took the brunt of the work. And then I was gone, whether it be off to school or college or whatever. So it just wasn't around as much. So dad was the one that endured quite a bit of the hardships in the labor side there. And so he just always had the thought, okay, once we went through that one really hard calving season, we lost some calves, we dealt with the mud. He's like, man, we got to do something different. And in our mind, we kind of fell upon, let's just kind of look at this hoop building, right? And so we looked kind of at that route, ultimately ended up settling on that. And within that, we kind of had this idea, well, maybe we can use this to grow our herd. So, went from 150 head of cows up to 300 head of cows, built this hoop building. Now, all of a sudden, we're taking on all this debt. The debt for the hoop building. We'd put up a commodity shed prior to that. We bought a bale processor. We bought a payloader. And the hoop building itself was a big undertaking that just kind of added up really, really fast. And then not to mention, we bought 150, well, at the time, I think it was less than that, but roughly 150 head of cows to expand. So adding all that debt up as once. And then looking back, and I guess get back to the financial side of things, our operation at the time was steady Eddie. We had very little extreme growth. And so therefore we had very little big losses. And so now all of a sudden we are just jumping way into things and just expanding and changing things like with the snap of the fingers almost. And I think that change is what always kind of gets us, kind of that change in things and change in course, if you will. So I always kind of go back to the phrase that I feel like our operation was not set up to handle the financial expansion that we did. We didn't honestly do it with integrity. When we expanded off of like, hey, let's do this. It maybe be an opportunity to get Garrett back to the farm. There'll be enough work for us to do. This will allow us to continue on to the next generation. But we didn't necessarily do the work as far as, okay, what do the cash flows look like? What does it look like in good times and in bad? Is this going to affect our balance sheet in a positive way and a negative way? Is there enough equity there? What happens if we have some losses? How are we going to structure this so it's feasible for cash flow, for repayment, for debt service, all that other fun stuff? It was more or less, hey, banker, this is what we want to do. Can we do it? And our banker was kind of a yes banker. And so he was very quiet as well. And so, yeah, he kind of went along with us because we were steady Eddie, because we had a decent equity and all that other fun stuff, right? Build up a good operation. There shouldn't be any reason this shouldn't work. Well, not necessarily. Okay. And so that was kind of leading up to it. And then at the time, I was actually working off farm. So we built a hoop building in 2016, also the same year that my wife and I got married. I was working off farm at the neighbor's feed yard, all within like a mile of our places here. So all really close. So that way, whenever I got done at the neighbor's feed yard and he farmed as well, I'd go back and help dad as much as possible. And so that was always something for me that I just wanted to get back to the farm full time. I had actually a hard time working for somebody else. And it was to some extent a positive thing. And sometimes I see it as a negative thing as well. But either way, I would much rather work on our own operation than work for somebody else's. And that's just something that I had the mindset of. And so anytime that I could, I was back there working on the farm. And so I remember 2016, we built this, we took on all these cows, and we're in the fall of 2016 and we're farming the same amount of acres, double the head of cows in a hoop building that was actually more labor intensive than what we thought it was going to be, bedding cows every day, feeding them, and then calving. And so we're dealing with cows and calves and vaccinating and taking care of them, all that stuff. So all these things to do, right? And then running cows out on grass. So you're still dealing with those as well, and stocks, all this stuff. And it got to be where I remember the conversation pretty distinctively. My dad and my uncle were getting to where they were probably getting overworked. And so probably getting a little bit overwhelmed. I just remember we just remember sitting, it's actually in the house that we live in right now. And the basement used to be where kind of our office area was. And we're just sitting there having a conversation. You could tell that they were just burnt out a little bit. And they wanted me to kind of maybe consider coming back to the farm full time. And I just always kind of laughed. I said, well, you guys can't afford me. You know what I mean? I kind of laughed about it. I said it probably a little bit of a naive or arrogant way. But the comment was made, well, we can't afford not to have you come back. And I always go back to that because they talk about can't afford to not have you come back. Well, literally our thought process, our minds are just strictly more in just a labor standpoint and a production standpoint, getting things done. All right. So from both my dad and my uncle at the time, just maybe drowning a little bit in the labor, talking about can't afford to not have you come back. Well, there was no financials to back that up. There was nothing to say. It was literally just, well, we're not getting the work done. You got to come back and help us. So that way we're not swum under all this workload, right? Swum under everything that needs to be done. And so it wasn't looking at the financials, looking at the cash flow. Can this support another salary, another household here? There was none of that. It was, hey, we have this work to do. We're not getting it done. You need to come back to the farm. And so this is kind of that red flag number one. There probably was some other red flags before this, but when it comes to getting the next generation back, I feel like that's another huge flag that comes up all the time is I'm drowning here. I'm running my ass off, kind of falling behind. We got to stay timely on things. We got to get things done in a timely manner. If we don't get this done, we're falling behind. So you got to come back to the farm. There's no typically, let's look at the cash flow. Can it support it? Can it support it in good times and in bad? There was none of that. It was, okay, let's make this transition to have Garrett come back full time. And so that's what I did. It was in the fall of 2016. I remember it pretty clearly. I remember helping the neighbor finish up with harvest. And then it was pretty much right after that, I came back full time. And so that was just kind of how that transition played out, basically. And so that was just kind of one of those instances that really stuck out. So that would be what I call a comeback. So that's where I came back to the operation full time. All of a sudden, we got the next generation working with us full time. And so that's when I'm going to kind of fast forward to the next step, which is kind of the hardships, right? The hardships that faced thereafter. And so it was probably 2017 was one of those years where we're just trying to figure things out. Kind of the first full cycle, full calendar year of having cows in the barn. So the way that our system worked is that, like I said, hoop barn, bed pack hoop barn. And so what we do is we would calve in there with our two different groups. We had a spring group and a fall group. So we would calve in there and then breed in there, and then we'd ship them out, and then we'd bring the next group in. So 2017 was kind of that first year with all those cows and trying to kind of manage and maintain everything. So we're just learning constantly and doing the best job that we can. So that was one of those years where we're just, honestly, for me being back full time, I was living the dream. I'm working at home, which is what I always wanted to do. We're working our butt off, which is I have no problem doing. We'd just been married, no kids at the time yet. And so I didn't mind any of that. I didn't mind getting up early and doing all the work with the cows and the livestock and the crops and all that stuff. And it was pretty fun. But thereafter, we get into like 2018, 2019. Those are really when all the financial struggles showed up, where all the hardships showed up, where we were faced with kind of the reality of bringing the next generation back and what that actually entails from a negative financial standpoint. So from the financial standpoint and the negatives, and really a lot of this, I would say, if I had to pin it all down, because this has come up in conversations many times. I remember it clear as day when we were in the midst of it all, is where did all this debt come from? How did we get to this point? If I had to nail it all down, and without getting too deep into the weeds, I would say a lot of it came from the expansion of, and not exactly structuring this expansion properly. This episode's not about pointing fingers or pointing blame on anybody, but I don't think the banker had set up everything structured the way that it maybe should have been. I think there was too much debt service up front. And when you can't service that up front, it just kind of gets pushed behind, and that interest is a little bit higher and it is pushed down the road. It kind of snowballs in a negative way, not a positive way. And so that's where I feel like a lot of that started to kind of show up and started to come from. And then within that, we still had some health issues on the calves, still had some death loss issues. And so just doing the best that we can with that side of things. And so a lot of those hardships really started to come to light. And now we're like, man, this is a lot of work and not exactly a lot of fun, because we're losing money, because we're not exactly paying our bills back, because we can't stay afloat. And then I believe it was in 2018, 2019, trying to get my years straight sometimes, but we ended up refinancing all the debt that we had into one big loan and took out, basically had to use some extra collateral to get that done. And there too, setting us up for probably gave us some breathing room, gave us some life. But then that also set us up for some challenges coming ahead in the forward. And so not to go too deep into the weeds with that, but those hardships came to light where all of a sudden now we're trying to figure out, where's this debt coming from? How are we going to get out of it? And how can we basically make sure that passing it on to the fifth generation doesn't become the last? And so that's where all those hardships, all those hard conversations with the banker multiple times a year, not just once a year. Hey, here's your note. See you later. Going to the banker's office consistently, trying to figure out how we're going to pay this back. And constantly, every time you walk in that office, felt like you were in the principal's office, just sitting here trying to figure out what's he going to say? Is he going to say he's going to shut us off? Is he going to say we got to basically sell half the herd? What's he going to say? And not knowing what he was going to say, and that uncertainty will eat you alive, sweating bullets, feeling like you're just trying to explain yourself, trying to explain what went well without backing it up with numbers, trying to figure out what you're going to do moving forward with no plan of action. And then sitting in the banker's office with the attorney, with all the wives of the operation, all the emotions that were in that room, trying to figure out how we're going to keep this Ruskamp legacy alive. And feeling like at the time, this is where we're going back to the emotion side of things. Coming from the son of the father who tried to get his son back to the operation, feeling like if it wasn't for me coming back and wanting to farm so goddamn bad, we would have never been in those situations. We would have never had to be in a room with me and my wife, and my mom and dad, uncle and aunt, all pissed kind of at each other, all pissed at the banker, the attorney that's telling us what to do. Not sure what we're going to do, not sure how we're going to survive. Sitting there, and then later in time when we had our first son, sixth generation Ruskamp, trying to figure out if there's not even thinking it's going to be possible for this to carry on to the next generation, right? Sitting there in church trying to pray to God, like, hey, just help us get through this. Praying that we just don't lose it all. And I say all that just to kind of bring up the emotions that were real and raw at the time and are still there, still very real. It can take you back to those moments precisely and the feelings that come up from that. I share all those hardships because I feel like that weight is on my shoulders probably more than anybody else. Yeah, I'm sure my dad trying to get the next generation back and feeling like he didn't do it the best job possible and feeling maybe he didn't do his due diligence to run numbers, to run it as a business and all that other stuff, yada, yada. I'm sure he feels that weight a lot as well. But for me, it's hard for me to see some of those things a little bit differently because I feel like I was the one that caused all that. And so I felt that weight probably more than anybody, and I had to carry that and I had to live with that. Now, on the same token, flipping this a little bit differently, back to the beginning part of that kind of that reel that I shared, right? But if also it wasn't for me, the farm would not have survived. Okay, so that's also the thought process that comes up. Because within all of these hardships, within those meetings with the bank or the attorney, calling the farm crisis hotline because we don't know what the hell we're going to do and we just want to make sure this thing survives. And I'll admit that. That's things that most people won't willing to talk about. But hey, this is what we're here to talk about today, the hardships. So you're not alone if you've ever had thoughts of doing that. Don't feel ashamed as much as we did is meeting in that church up in Norfolk with everybody involved in the farm crisis, lawyers and all this other stuff. I didn't want to be there. But at the end of the day, I knew that I had to take ownership of our situation if we were going to have a chance at saving this. Right. So I took it upon my shoulders when I carried that weight because I felt like I had to, because it was my responsibility and because it was partially my doing. And so I carried that weight more than anybody. But I also carried the responsibility. I took ownership. So I focused on the numbers. I did everything that I could to dive into the numbers, look at the numbers, what can we do different, analyze them from a balance sheet standpoint, cash flow standpoint, cost of production, put all that stuff together and be the business owner that we never had. We never chose to be. And so I had to do that. Right. So I say that if it wasn't for me, there's kind of two parts to that. If it wasn't for me, the farm would not have also survived. Well, that is true. Okay. So if there would not have been a next generation of Ruskamps to come back to this operation, what does the farm look like if I hadn't come back, if I had gone elsewhere to build my life elsewhere? Well, for my life, it might have been better. We don't know. We're not going to dwell on that. But also, maybe there would not have been a generation to come back to carry on the Ruskamp legacy. Maybe it would have quit after 4 generations. Maybe that would have been it. Don't know. But also, I'm saying this and I'm not trying to pat myself on the shoulders, but maybe it's you that's listening to this right now or somebody else in your operation that needs to take ownership so the farm can survive. All right. So furthermore, we did come back. Those decisions happen. I came back to the operation full time. We took on the debt. We've got all this stuff we're trying to figure out and dig ourselves out of this hole. If it wasn't for me, we would probably not be here today from some of the decisions that I actually made, from the time that I spent in the office, focusing on the numbers, doing my due diligence, putting together cash flow, balance sheet, cost production, figuring out what we can do differently, figuring out how the changes that we can make so they'll have a positive impact on us and not continue to dig this hole. All right, put down the goddamn shovel, boy, and just get yourself back up to where you can actually breathe again. So if it wasn't for me, I truly believe, and if it wasn't for the attitude that I had as far as You need to do this. No one is coming to save us. No one's coming to save you. I had to adapt that mindset. And if it wasn't for that, I truly believe that I don't know if I'd be talking to you here today as the fifth generation of Ruskamp Farms. I truly don't know. It's hard to say. But either way, I bring that up because there's a lot of emotions in that. And once again, not trying to pat myself on the shoulders, not trying to build up my ego, but that's something that we need to acknowledge, that no one's coming to save us. And you listening to this, no one's come to save you, whatever situation you're in, whatever season you're in. So I bring that up. We acknowledge the hardships. We acknowledge where we're at today. That's the second part of that as well, right? As far as the farm would not have survived if it wasn't for me. Those are two things back to the kind of that dynamic there, that duo, that dichotomy, if you will. Those are really kind of hard things to wrestle with. But I just bring all this up because I feel like there's a lot of big takeaways that maybe a guy can really acknowledge here. And maybe as you're listening to this, there's some things that come to mind for you. And you're like, wow, that sounds pretty similar. Thinking about the workload, just always trying to make sure you're taking care of the day-to-day tasks, and the finances will take care of themselves. If you work hard, you'll make a good living. We'll be fine if we just continue to work hard and do an honest day's labor, where it'll all work itself out, right? If we pray to God, it'll all work itself out. Not saying that isn't the case. Not saying that. Just throwing that out there because that's the thoughts that come up, right? And so that's probably something that you maybe acknowledged. Maybe we just didn't focus on the finances. Maybe we just focused on the work itself, work at hand, all those things. Or maybe we just didn't do our numbers as good as we could have. Maybe we just faced circumstances that were out of our control. Maybe we had, high death loss because of weather. Maybe we had a drought in there or two droughts in there or whatever the case is. Things that just kind of kept beating us up, kind of hitting us in the mouth, hitting us in the jaw, punching us, getting us down, all that other stuff, right? Maybe there's things that were out of our control. But at the end of the day, when it comes to bringing the next generation back, and kind of making those decisions, as I was kind of thinking about this conversation, I'm like, well, what do I wish would have been different? So I think that's where I want to go next, is talking about what I wish would have been different as we went about this process. A couple things. Obviously, the low-hanging fruit would be, well, I wish we would have done our numbers better. I wish we would have been more responsible with our numbers and kind of went through that situation a little bit better and really looked into forecast into the future a little bit better as to maybe running some risk scenarios, okay, good times, what do bad times look like? Maybe structured things better so that way it didn't put us in a hole right away and now we're fighting our way back out. Yeah, it'd be pretty easy for me to look back and say, man, I wish we wouldn't have built the hoop building. But in the grand scheme of things, everything happens for a reason. And so I say all of that because when it comes to getting the next generation back, it's very crucial. We think about the next generation in such an exciting way. Man, this is an opportunity to carry on the legacy, carry on the Ruskamp legacy, get the next generation back and continue to do what the previous generations have done, is work hard, be a steward of the land and the livestock, carry on the legacy and carry on the lifestyle that we've built here in Northeast Nebraska and just live this awesome life we have. We have an opportunity to pass this on to the next generation. We think of it in such a positive manner, and it is. Don't get me wrong, but there can be a lot of negatives that come from that. Walking story of that myself. There can be a lot of negatives that come from that. And so I wish we maybe just would have thought about some of those consequences beforehand. Maybe not been so naive. Maybe not been so, I don't want to say irresponsible, but just been a little bit more aware of what could happen. And so thinking about that in a little bit different light. I also think back to a lot of operations, and when it's specifically family operations, specifically maybe a father-son operation, we think about carrying on the legacy by immediately bringing back that next generation to work within the same operation as us. Things that I wish would have been different is maybe, especially with the size of our operation, maybe acknowledging that it's not going to be right away that we bring the next generation back. It's not going to maybe necessarily work at their current structure of the operation, the current cash flow, the current profitability to bring the next generation back into the operation full time. Maybe we pursue this next generation to, hey, if you want to come back, you got to build something yourself that maybe coincides or is right alongside of the current operation that's going to be complementary to the operation, something of that nature. And maybe really encourage the next generation to kind of go out and pave their own path, so to speak. And then at some point, that path will veer in and be side by side this one, and it'll be a nice, easier transition. It won't be so reliant on the current generation and what that actually looks like. So those are just some things that I wish maybe would have been done a little bit differently, maybe would have been thought about a little bit differently. So this isn't necessarily a legacy planning episode. There's just some things that I feel like a guy can take away as to ultimately what I wish would have been done differently. Obviously you got the better financials, maybe looking into the future a little bit better to forecast what could be in the future. positive or negative. And then maybe just we think about this generation and think about bringing the next generation back and just having to be in the operation with us and maybe just doing that a little bit differently. And then not always looking at the workload, but working out the profitability like, hey, can this support us long term? Is there enough cash flow to support another livelihood, another household income? And what does that actually look like? Not just strictly working out the workload, not ignoring the numbers. So, a couple of big takeaways here. And all of this, all said and done, as we kind of get back and we look at this, the one thing I really want to reiterate a lot is that life happens for you, not to you. Okay, I say that because, yeah, do I feel like coming from the son of the father who tried to get his son back to the operation, do I feel a lot of weight from all the hardships that we've had to endure? Yeah, I hope you can kind of get a sense of that as you hear the emotions come across this mic. But at the same time, I would not be talking to you into this microphone today if it was not for all those hardships, if it was not for the don't quit mentality, if it was not for all those sleepless nights, all those emotional conversations in the rooms that I didn't want to be in. If it was not for all those things, I would not be talking with you here today. That's the facts of the matter, because I probably would be somewhere else. I probably would not have had the guts to start Pioneer Farmer and to start Pioneer Mindset and to be have the willingness to help other people. So life happens for you, not to you. So I say that because no matter what situation you're in, what boots you're in, what season that you're in, we need to acknowledge to some extent, you are exactly where you're supposed to be. Life happens for you, not to you. And when you adapt that mentality that life happens for you, not to you, you no longer become a victim. You become the hero of your own story. You dictate the outcome of your story actually is. That attitude, and like I say, I tell this to my boys all the time, attitude changes everything. And so if we can adapt that mindset that life happens for you, not to you, and you're exactly where you need to be, that God has done this for a reason, there's a lot of confidence and conviction and contentment within that. So I bring that up because that allows me, everything that I've been to thus far allows me to be speaking to you and hopefully bringing a message to you that you've gotten something from, by the way. Hopefully, maybe we can try to do this better in the future. I know that's the one thing that I've tried to take away as much as possible. Is like, well, I know what we're going to be doing in the future. You know, I've got 4 boys right now. As I think about bringing the next generation back, my wife was actually having a conversation the other day. It's like, well, operation definitely isn't the place where it can bring 4 boys back to the operation full time right now. And even if it was, I think a guy needs to just be really strategic about how we bring that next generation back so that we set them up for success and not failure. That's really the big thing here. So we're just trying to do our best to not only carry on this lifestyle and this legacy, but set up that next generation for success and whatever it takes to do that. That might be hardships in the moment. That might be being disciplined in the moment, might be turning down an opportunity that is blinding us in the moment. So those are the big things that I want to kind of reiterate as we kind of get to rounding this out. And lastly, I guess I'll just kind of throw this in there is I mentioned a lot of the hardships that I've been through, the reason I started Pioneer Farmer, the reason that I've been able to focus on the financial side of things and help farmers and ranchers do the same, regardless of whatever situation you're in, whatever boots you're in, whatever season you're in. If you're junior or juniorette, if you're the guy trying to pass this on, trying to figure out what you're going to do, if you just want to try to figure out what's your options, what can you do? What do the finances even look like? You know, back to the numbers, you know, can't afford to do this. Maybe you don't even know. Maybe that can't afford is just that kind of thing, that story we tell ourselves in the back of our mind because we truly do not know. And that's very common, by the way. You know, if that's you, if you want to just have a conversation about this, what do things look like for you? Is there any part of the story that you can relate to? Any part of the story that you'd like to kind of see once if there's things that you could do differently in your current situation or moving forward, or just literally want to have a conversation? Let's chat. Let's do our best not to avoid these hard conversations, these hard decisions. Let's do our best to make sure that we are trying to carry on a legacy that's going to have a positive impact on the next generation. So that's all I got for this one, folks. I hope that you found some value in this. Hope there's something that you can use from this episode, take away to your own operation, relate it to your own story, and maybe build a better future for yourself. We'll catch you guys next time. Thanks for tagging along with me today as we sharpened our mindsets. If you've gained insight from today's episode, be sure to take a screenshot to share or send this episode to somebody who might also find value in it. For more, follow me on Instagram @Ruskamp or on Facebook, and join me next time for more conviction through clarity.